Hello, Underdog, and welcome back to the Underdog Chronicles. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Um, you're going to be actually listening to me for the whole of this episode. It won't be too long, don't worry. I just thought about adding, a few more, like a little bit of a little bit of a variety to the show. And I thought, why not, um, add episodes where you're going to hear this voice a bit more. And I'm going to be talking about the topics that we kind of touched on in, like, let's say, previous guest episodes and kind of delve into that. And then also, I think other important topics that are important for the stage of life that we're in at this point. But for today, I thought, why not start this kind of new little, like, segment of the podcast with me interviewing myself. And I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Um, but I think we've all experienced, that electrifying moment when an idea sparks in our minds and a vision that, is so vivid, it feels like it's begging to be brought to life. And yet, alongside this exhilaration, often comes a chorus of doubts and fears, like unwelcome guests, at a celebration. And it's kind of an idea, that it kind of plagues you. It's always at the back of your mind. You kind of have a crush on it. You can't get it out of your mind. And you can't stop telling your friends about it. You can't stop dreaming about it, but you're not doing anything about it because of, just all of these sorts of skepticism or, the fear of failure. And I remember, grappling with these conflicting emotions not so long ago, especially when contemplating the launch of my podcast. Now, if you haven't um, listened to any of my previous episodes before, if you haven't subscribed, I would please ask you to do that because it really goes a long way in us just reaching more people and providing more value to people. And if you have like someone who you think is, can get some value out of this podcast, please be sure to share it with them. As I said, it really goes a long way and I really, really appreciate it. And if you're already one of my followers, thank you. It's nice. It's nice to have you back. It's nice to have you back, underdog. Um, but yeah, so today I'm going to be kind of talking about, the reason behind why I started this podcast and also some of the lessons that I've learned along the way in these, let's say, 7 months so far. Um, yeah, so let's get into it. So one thing that I usually do in my podcasts is I ask an icebreaker question. And usually this icebreaker question is like something like it's just a question to, just to get the guest feeling like a little bit more comfortable and, just to get us rolling. And so one of my favorite questions to ask is what is your hidden like talent that's also quite unique? So I'd say it's not really hidden, but not everyone knows that I have it. But a lot of people do know that I have it because I'm very proud of it. I would say that the talent is touching my nose with my tongue. I know it's not that rare or unique, and quite a few people can do it. I know, but I don't think I have anything else that's like unique or hidden. Like or as bizarre as like if you listen to one of my previous episodes with Johan Stradum, I asked him this exact question, and his answer was, I think he has what did I say? Okay, I have to remember it now. But he was saying that he can catch 13 grapes in his mouth at one going. And I was like, wow, boy, that is crazy. I don't think I've ever like met someone who can, catch that many grapes with their mouth. Like that's pretty crazy. And then I think he also said that he ranked like he's kind of in the top 5% of people who've played Mario Kart, like in the rankings and stuff. And I've never played that game before, but I heard that it's really fun. And yeah, so if you want to kind of hear his hear him talk about, his story and, his hidden talent, I would definitely refer you to that episode. It was so much fun and it was such an engaging conversation. He's such an incredible and charming person. And I think you leave that podcast episode, like, wow, it just lifts your spirits. So if you're needing any spirit lifting, I would definitely, um, I would definitely recommend listening to that podcast episode. But I think getting into this episode a little bit more, I've always had this background of storytelling, just this passion and love for storytelling. I actually remember as I was growing up, my gran created this story about these little animals living in this their own little forest, their own little town, and we kind of created that story when I was like 4. So like when I was like 15 or something, we kind of continued with that story. Changing characters, creating new characters, creating different scenes and stories, and almost like making a little like series for ourselves with just our words. And that I think really sparked my interest in storytelling because then later I got into school and I loved creative writing and poetry. Was I the best at it? Am I the next, Enid Blyton? No, I'm not sure, but I definitely do love it. And then it kind of transitioned into, focusing on writing an actual novel that I haven't completed yet and I cannot find, for anything. I've been looking for it and just haven't found it yet. And then I started I started an online community during COVID, like in 2020, because I wanted to reach people who are now like being disconnected from one another. And I was with the aim of helping people not feel so alone. And so I started reaching out to people, started collaborating with people and sharing content, just focus on telling people stories. And then I started my first podcast and I wasn't very consistent with it. And then I stopped it. I started the next one and then I stopped it and then I started the next one. And I did like one episode and I stopped it. Um and now I'm on my fourth podcast. And this is probably the longest standing podcast ever of my four podcasts, three of which have failed. But we are here today. We are recording this podcast. So um that's kind of my story and my background in storytelling and what I've always loved about it. And I think speaking about that, I always have had this interest in knowing people's stories, whether it's people's love stories or how they got into a specific degree when I was in university, um to now where I want to know the stories of ordinary people who are starting things. And that's kind of what brought me to starting the this podcast, was focusing on telling the stories of ordinary people, starting gigs, just doing things, in their lives they that once was just a dream for them and now they're actually acting upon it. And I realized that one of the failures that I had, one of the challenges that I faced throughout my podcasting journey, was my focus was wrong. My focus on who I was trying to target was wrong because I was trying to target this whole number of people instead of just trying to have a conversation with one person, you know, just instead of creating content for one person. And that one person is not just anyone, it is someone who's sitting on their bed right now with a crazy idea, who has this crazy dream, but hasn't done anything about it and is just being held back, by intrusive thoughts or skepticism or just a fear of failing, like I've struggled with. And at the end of the day, I was just like, I need, before I start this podcast, or even while I'm starting this podcast, if I want this to be different to all of my previous podcasts, I need to focus on creating content for one person, you know? And I need to focus on, just to stop worrying about the metrics or anything else, because this podcast is, this podcast is to just help one person. Even if it adds value to one person's life, I'll be happy. And if it's adding value to your life, I'm really happy. It's it's what my my goal is here. So just add value to your life, even if it's just a little bit, even if it's just a little motivation from hearing, um, William Sazo's story of him, being brought, just going through like a bit of like a tough childhood, and then becoming the person that he is today, and being like, I can relate with that, and I'm also not going to let my past or my circumstances hold me back from achieving my goals and my dreams. Even if that helps just one person, I'm happy. Um, I feel like I'm not getting emotional while I'm saying this, but I feel like I am. Um, but yeah, it's just that was my why behind it, and I think that's, as I said, my focus was wrong, and with a lot of my podcasts, I didn't have a very specific why, and now I do. Um, so those would be some of the challenges that I've faced. But I think some of the lessons that I've learned so far, and some really positive lessons, would be, in terms of accountability, putting yourself out there, preparing and doing research, and embracing the awkwardness, just realizing that your guests are humans too, and using what you have. So I know I listed it out there, but I'm actually going to go into a little bit of detail, not too much. So the first one first lesson that I learned was accountability. And I like to think of it as indirect peer pressure. Because when I ventured into podcasting, I quickly realized that accountability is really important. Because you commit to your guest and you schedule an interview. And they've already offered up some of their time that they could be doing anything else, to be interviewed and to share their story. And so it when you make that commitment to someone, you have to hold yourself accountable. You can't be like, oh no, you can't always be like, oh no, something came up. You have to schedule it, into your time. And this is only not only like ensure that I um consistent content, which I'm still trying to achieve. I know I haven't like I'm not the most consistent person ever, but I am, actively trying to become more consistent. But it's also kind of pushed me to overcome any self doubts or procrastination of any sorts, because once I commit to a guest, I have to show up. They're giving me the privilege of being able to share their story on my platform. And if I can't show up, then like, what why does this podcast even exist? And then this kind of moves on to the second one, which is say hi, aka putting yourself out there. So when you put yourself out there, it can be very intimidating, especially when you're reaching out to potential guests. And I've like experiences many times where I've reached out to guests and potential guests, and I've like asked them, like, I've put my kind of like my pitch into the DM or the email, and I've like, you know, hi, this is what my podcast is about. I'd love to share your story. And sometimes I get nothing back. Sometimes you get something back, and then it, the chain of communication just doesn't flow anymore, and that's it. You never hear from that person again. And one thing I've definitely learned is that the risk of, rejection is worth the potential reward of engaging with inspiring individuals. Whether it's through social media or face-to-face interactions, taking that initial step can lead to meaningful connections and impactful conversations. And yeah, I mean, I put myself out there, and sometimes I failed, but I've also put myself out there, and I've got to interact with amazing people and share their stories on my podcast. And it wouldn't have been my podcast wouldn't even be here, if those guests hadn't said yes and committed some of their time to show up. And my next point is embrace the awkwardness, aka it's okay to slip up. Now, embracing awkward moments or initial nerves is part of the journey. I think I recall feeling nervous before most of my interviews, but each experience has taught me to embrace authenticity and connect with my guests on a human level. Because we all stumble, we all make mistakes. None of us are perfect. And oftentimes when I start an interview, I am so nervous. And sometimes it doesn't even make sense. I'm like, I've done this like 5 times before. Why am I nervous? And it's just, I don't know, I just kind of, when I interview this person, I'm like, they're so cool. And I'm like, like it's sometimes like you're speaking to like, sometimes feel like you're speaking to someone like you really admire. And now you have to ask some questions and you're like, comes to that moment, you're just like, bro, what did I do? What am I going to say? Um, and that was like the next lesson that I learned, um, is that your guests, are humans too. And it was very important for me to approach, my interviews with humility and empathy because, as I said earlier, humility, I had to have humility because I was so nervous at times. And I know that I messed up sometimes when I was asking them questions. And sometimes I wouldn't like, sometimes I'd interrupt them and I'd be like, oh shucks, I just interrupted them. I just interrupted them. Oh no. But like, you sometimes just have to be like, you have to be humble because you are continuously learning and making mistakes. And then you have to realize that these people are individuals too, That's something I had to realize was that they're they're the same. Like they're doing different things. They have different journeys and experiences, but they're human. And I think by focusing on that, I was able to treat them as equals and embrace their humanity. And I was able to foster genuine conversations that resonated, with not only me, but I hopefully with you. And so, these it was just kind of seeing them for who they were instead of like their titles or their accomplishments. And sure, like in my interviews we talk about that, but what my main focus is to figure out more of the behind the scenes behind the awards and all of their businesses and how they kind of created it. And as I said, we are all, if you're listening to this, you're an underdog and you have a dream. And sometimes, the thought that kind of holds you back is like, I don't have enough equipment, I don't have enough money. But that leads me to my last point, which was the lesson that I learned, which was using what you have. And for me, that was, my phone or my laptop. Like when I started podcasting, all I had was my phone. And that actually helped me become more humble because I'm like, I know that I don't have the best equipment. I know that sometimes when I record the podcast, it's not the best quality. But you know what? I'm just going to keep on trying. I'm going to do what I can to make sure I give the best quality, but I'm not going to hold that back from me posting consistently, because somehow, somewhere, I will I will find more equipment or I'll get more resources, to fund this project. Um, and so it's sometimes just taking that first step and, using the resources that you have, just allowing yourself to stumble and learn along the way. And I think one of the guests whose story really touched me in terms of this point was Sebastian Daniels. So he started his coffee shop with the 50,000 that his dad had left him after he passed. And that, it might sound like a lot, but it's not a lot to start like a coffee shop. He told me like it bought him like a coffee machine, maybe a few tables and chairs, and that was it. And it's like, whoa, okay, that's like, it's just, he didn't start off with a lot, but he built himself up and he used what he had, and he did a lot of DIY work. And you know, I think one of the greatest things I learned from him was just his humility, and also just he he was very real with me. He was very like, he didn't hold anything back. He was like, he turned 30 now, and some of his friends are, you know like doing things, and obviously, you can compare yourself to them. I do that all the time, where I see my friends and I see what they're doing and I see what I am, and I'm like, wow, I am nowhere close to that. And I think that's a whole topic for another day. But he was telling me that in his entrepreneurship journey, he had to constantly remind himself what his goal was, and then his goal was different, and that yes, he might not have the resources that he would want to have right now, but he has some resources and he's going to use that. And I think from him, I learned that dreams don't require grand setups, they just require you. They have everything that you need to turn your dream into a reality is alive in you, and it's already there. You just have to kind of take that first step and have the willingness to start and stumble. So if you've ever felt the tug of a bold idea or hidden passion, now is the time to embrace it. The journey may seem daunting and full of doubts and uncertainties, but remember, every great endeavor starts with a single step. Whether it's starting a podcast, launching a business, starting a YouTube channel, um, don't let fear hold you back. I've let fear hold me back too many times. And I've often still um still have those intrusive thoughts, and I am nowhere near perfect. And that's what I want to share in my podcast is I don't want to share completely perfect stories because I know mine is not perfect and it's as imperfect as can be. And that we all have fears that never really go away sometimes. You just have to keep on pushing through them and facing them. That's a scary part of growing up. But, sometimes you just have to take that first step, even if it's small, and and, it- and allow it to unfold into something incredible. So I'll leave you with a few words before I stop this episode. Um, I want you, if you have a big dream and you've just thought about it, I want you to write it down. And if you've written it down, I want you to think of ways you can accomplish it. And if you've thought of ways to accomplish it, I want you to at least do one thing that will accomplish it today. And if you have, well done. I'm really proud of you. And if you ever need motivation or inspiration, I want to hear, stories of people who are just like you and me, who are starting new things, the place to come to, the Underdog Chronicles. Thank you and goodbye. This is not goodbye, actually. I'll see you. I'll see you. I'll kind of see you when we release our next episode. But thank you so much for listening to this. And I really hope that you're doing well and keep safe and keep healthy. This is Miriam from the Underdog Chronicles. Have a good day or night wherever you are.